In the heart of Texas, 16-year-old Grace Anderson had everything: beauty, brains, and a father who would die protecting her. But beneath the perfect surface of their small town, a predator waited, watching her every move. No one could have predicted that Grace's forbidden romance with a charming Nigerian businessman 3 times her age would spiral into an obsession so dark, only death could end it. The security camera at Grace Anderson's home captured the last glimpse of her silhouette at 11:42 p.m., February 12, 2009. A teenage girl, her ponytail swaying in the Texas wind, carefully sliding her bedroom window shut behind her. She had done this before, many times. But this night would be different. David Anderson still relives that moment in his nightmares. The sound of his footsteps down the hallway, that familiar path to his daughter's bedroom. 16 years of checking on her every night at midnight, a ritual born from the day he lost his wife. But that night, when he pushed open her door, the emptiness hit him like a physical blow. Grace's bed was empty, sheets still warm. Her window, usually locked tight, showed the smallest gap. In that moment, every parent's worst fear became his reality. Cedar Grove, Texas wasn't supposed to be the kind of place where teenage girls disappeared. Population 28,000, it was a community where children still rode their bikes until sunset, where neighbors brought casseroles when someone was sick, and where single father David Anderson had spent 16 years building what he thought was an unbreakable fortress around his only daughter. Grace Anderson was everything a father could hope for. At 16, she maintained straight A's, sang solo in the church choir, and still said yes, sir, and no to her elders. Her mother's death when she was just a baby had left David fiercely protective, perhaps too protective. But behind Grace's innocent smile and perfect grades lay secrets that would shatter her family's world and rock this quiet Texas community to its core. The security cameras at Cedar Grove Mall captured the moment that would set this tragedy in motion. January 15, 2009. A seemingly ordinary Thursday afternoon. Grace, still in her cheerleading uniform after practice, was sharing a smoothie with her best friend Katie at the food court. That's when Victor Cole first saw her. At 52, Victor Cole commanded attention. His tailored suits and cultured Nigerian accent stood out in small-town Texas. He carried himself with the confidence of a successful businessman, though later investigations would reveal a very different truth. To the teenage girls giggling over their smoothies, he seemed sophisticated, worldly, everything their small Texas town was not. Grace noticed him first. Katie Reynolds would later tell investigators, her voice breaking. He was so different from the boys at school. The way he looked at her. I should have known something wasn't right. Their first interaction seemed innocent enough. Victor walked past their table, deliberately dropping his handkerchief, a move he had perfected over years of similar encounters. Grace, ever polite, called out to him. 3 minutes and 17 seconds of conversation followed, captured frame by mall security cameras. A gentleman's introduction. A careful compliment. A business card pressed into a teenage girl's hand. That night, as Grace lay in her bed clutching that card with its embossed gold lettering, her father David slept peacefully down the hall, unaware that his worst nightmare was just beginning. At 11:42 p.m., Grace's phone lit up with its first message from Victor. Sweet dreams, beautiful Grace. It would be the first of thousands, each message drawing her deeper into an obsession that would ultimately lead to that February night, 3 months later, when she would climb out of her bedroom window for the last time. No one in Cedar Grove could have predicted how their story would end. But by the time anyone realized the truth about Victor Cole, it would be too late to stop the tragedy that was already in motion. It started with a simple text message. Every night at exactly 11:42 p.m., Victor's name would light up Grace's phone screen. What began as innocent goodnight messages quickly evolved into hours-long conversations, Grace hiding under her covers, phone illuminating her young face as she fell deeper into Victor's carefully woven web of words. You're so mature for your age, he would tell her. These small-town boys could never understand you like I do. Each message was calculated, designed to make Grace feel special, understood, different from other 16-year-olds. Victor knew exactly what a teenage girl longed to hear, especially one raised under strict rules by an overprotective father. Their phones became a lifeline of forbidden connection. During school, Grace would slip away to the bathroom just to read his messages. "Missing your beautiful smile," he would write, or "counting the minutes until I see you again." Her phone's photo gallery filled with secret screenshots of their conversations, carefully hidden in a password-protected app that Katie had helped her download. The mall became their sanctuary. Every Tuesday and Thursday, when Grace was supposedly at study group, they would meet in the far corner of the food court. Victor always came bearing gifts, not obvious ones that might raise suspicion, but carefully chosen tokens that could be easily hidden. A delicate silver bracelet that could pass for cheap costume jewelry. A small bottle of expensive perfume that she kept buried in her cheerleading bag. Designer lip glosses that looked just like the ones other girls carried. The first time he gave me a gift, Grace would later tell investigators, it was just a simple origami rose made from a napkin. He said it reminded him of me. Delicate but strong enough to hold its shape. That paper rose would eventually be found in Grace's diary, pressed between pages filled with hearts and elaborate fantasies of their future together. Katie Reynolds watched her best friend's transformation with growing unease. The Grace she had known since kindergarten was disappearing, replaced by someone who lived for those stolen moments with Victor. She stopped talking about anything else, Katie would later reveal. Every conversation somehow came back to him. How worldly he was, how successful, how he understood her in ways no one else could. Victor's expensive gifts became more frequent. A rose gold iPhone, which Grace told her father she had bought with saved babysitting money. A diamond pendant that she only wore beneath her clothes. Designer clothes that she kept at Katie's house, changing into them for their secret meetings. But it was their first kiss that truly sealed Grace's fate. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, instead of meeting at their usual spot, Victor had suggested they sit in his car to stay dry. His black Mercedes, parked in the far corner of the mall lot, became the stage for a moment Grace had dreamed about for weeks. He was so gentle, reads an entry in Grace's diary, dated March 3, 2009. Not rough and clumsy like boys at school. He cupped my face like I was something precious, something rare. When he kissed me, it felt like every romance movie I've ever watched. This is what love feels like. This is what I've been waiting for. That kiss opened the floodgates. Study groups became longer. Church youth group meetings mysteriously added extra sessions. Grace's normally pristine attendance record began showing unexplained absences. Each excuse was carefully crafted, with Katie serving as an unwitting alibi. Looking back, Katie would later say through tears, "I enabled it. Every time I covered for her, told her dad she was at my house studying, I was helping him get closer to her. But she was so happy, so convinced it was true love. What kind of best friend would I have been to destroy that?" Victor's possessiveness grew alongside Grace's infatuation. He would demand proof of where she was, who she was with. Pictures of her at cheerleading practice. Timestamps of her arrival at school. Their tender late-night conversations began to include subtle warnings. "You're mine now," he would text. "No one else can understand what we have. They'll try to tear us apart if they find out. We have to protect our love." The transformation of Grace Anderson's teenage infatuation into dangerous obsession began with a seemingly perfect Saturday in May. David Anderson believed his daughter was at an all-day cheerleading competition. Instead, Grace was crossing a line from which there would be no return. Victor's apartment became their sanctuary that day. Located in an upscale complex just outside Cedar Grove, it was decorated with calculated precision, African art pieces carefully placed to reinforce his crafted identity, expensive furniture chosen to impress a teenage girl's notion of sophistication. Grace's diary entry from that day reveals everything. "I gave him all of me today. It wasn't like the fumbling encounters with boys in basements after football games. Victor made me feel like a woman. He kept saying I was his now, completely his. And I am." What Grace saw as romance, investigators would later identify as textbook predatory behavior. Victor filmed their encounter without her knowledge, adding to his growing collection of blackmail material. Each intimate moment was another chain binding her to him. Their physical relationship intensified rapidly. Grace began skipping entire school days, her perfect attendance record crumbling. She crafted elaborate lies about study groups and college tours. Her phone buzzed constantly with Victor's demands. "Where are you? Send me a photo to prove it. Why did you take so long to respond?" The shrine in Grace's bedroom grew. Hidden behind her childhood stuffed animals, she kept every token of their relationship. Hotel keycards, movie tickets, dried flowers from their encounters. Her diary overflowed with passionate declarations. "He's jealous because he loves me so deeply. When he gets angry, it's only because he can't bear the thought of losing me." Victor's control tightened with each passing day. He demanded she install a location tracking app on her phone. "For your safety," he claimed. "So I always know where my future wife is." Grace complied eagerly, seeing it as proof of his devotion rather than the digital leash it was. Her grades plummeted. Teachers who had once praised her work now sent concerned emails to David. Grace stopped participating in class discussions, her mind consumed with checking her phone for Victor's messages. She'd write his name obsessively in her notebooks, surrounding it with hearts, adding Mrs. Grace Cole in practiced cursive. The physical evidence of their obsession filled Victor's apartment. Grace's cheerleading uniform hung in his closet. Her textbooks scattered across his coffee table. Her favorite snacks filled his kitchen. He created the illusion of domesticity, feeding her teenage fantasies of playing house. Katie watched helplessly as her best friend disappeared into the relationship. She stopped talking about anything else, Katie later told investigators. Every conversation was about Victor. What Victor thought. What Victor wanted. What Victor had planned for their future. It was like Grace herself just vanished. Victor's jealous outbursts escalated. If Grace spoke to a male classmate, her phone would explode with accusatory texts. He began showing up near school, watching her interactions. Once, he grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises when he saw her laughing with a male teacher. Grace's excuses became more desperate. She blamed cheerleading practice for the bruises. Claimed stress was affecting her grades. Told Katie she was just maturing when her friend noticed her increasing isolation. Every lie distanced her further from potential help. The physical intimacy became more intense, sometimes frightening. Victor's gentle touches gave way to possessive grabbing. He'd leave marks on her body deliberately, photographing them as proof of his ownership. Grace interpreted his roughness as passion, his control as protection. Her phone held the digital record of their obsession. Hundreds of daily texts, each requiring immediate response. Voice messages she would play on repeat. Photos that became increasingly explicit, though Grace never showed her face, one of Victor's many rules. The apartment became their world. Grace would spend entire weekends there, lost in what she thought was adult passion but was actually calculated manipulation. Victor would cook for her, teaching her to drink wine, playing at sophisticated romance while methodically documenting every compromising moment. By June, Grace had pushed away almost everyone except Katie. Her other friends stopped inviting her out, tired of her constant cancellations. She quit cheerleading, claiming she needed more time to study, time actually spent in Victor's bed. Victor's apartment told the story of his obsession too. Files on his computer tracked Grace's every move. Recordings of their encounters. Copies of her private photos. A diary of his own, detailing his methodical grooming process. Everything a predator needs to maintain control. The final stage of their descent into obsession came when Victor began talking about marriage. He painted pictures of their future together, exotic travels, luxury homes, freedom from her father's rules. Grace wrote pages of fantasy about their wedding, never suspecting that Victor was already planning how to use their relationship to secure his position in the country. What had started as a secret romance had become a dangerous obsession, consuming both predator and prey. Grace was too young to recognize the danger signs, too infatuated to see the manipulation. Victor had orchestrated every step, knowing exactly how to turn teenage romance into unbreakable chains. As summer approached, their story was racing toward its tragic conclusion. But in Grace's diary, the last entry before everything changed reads like a romance novel. Some people might call this obsession. But they don't understand. What Victor and I have is deeper than normal love. It's destiny. Those words, written in glittering pink ink, would later haunt everyone who failed to see the tragedy unfolding before their eyes. June brought suffocating Texas heat, and with it, Victor's ultimatum. Prove your love, he demanded one night in his apartment. Marry me now, or I'll know this meant nothing to you. Grace, trapped in her fantasy of eternal romance, saw only the proposal she dreamed of, not the manipulation behind it. The ring was expensive, platinum and diamonds that caught the light like tears. Victor slipped it onto her finger in his dimly lit apartment, but Grace could only wear it on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes. Soon, he promised, kissing her neck where the chain lay, you won't have to hide anymore. Their marriage plans took shape in secret text messages and whispered phone calls. Victor had connections, people who could forge documents, create false identities, make a 16-year-old legally marriageable on paper. Grace saw each illegal step as romantic, evidence of love conquering all obstacles. We'll have a real ceremony in Nigeria later, Victor promised, feeding her fantasies. White dress, hundreds of guests, everything you deserve. This is just the legal part. Grace spent hours on her phone, looking at wedding dresses she couldn't buy, planning a celebration that would never come. The reality of their romantic hideaway was darker than Grace's diary entries suggested. Victor's apartment became both heaven and prison. He demanded she spend every possible moment there, throwing jealous fits if she couldn't find ways to escape her father's watchful eye. Physical intimacy took a darker turn. Victor's demands became rougher, more specific. Grace's attempts to please him left her confused and sometimes in pain, but she interpreted his aggression as passion. Real love is intense, he would say, kissing the bruises he'd left. Only children want gentle romance. Katie was the only one who saw the changes in her friend. Grace started wearing long sleeves even in the heat, she later testified. She said it was because Victor liked modesty, but once I saw the marks on her wrists. She said they were from passionate love. I didn't know enough to recognize them as restraint bruises. The marriage plans accelerated when Victor claimed his visa was in jeopardy. We have to do it now, he insisted, his usual charm giving way to urgent demands. If we wait, they'll send me back to Nigeria. We'll lose everything. Grace, terrified of losing him, agreed to anything he suggested. The forged documents appeared with suspicious efficiency. Birth certificates showing Grace as 18. Parental consent forms with perfect forgeries of David's signature. Victor had done this before, though Grace wouldn't learn that until much later. Their wedding day dawned hot and humid. Grace skipped school, telling her father she was helping Katie's family prepare for a church event. The ceremony took place in a small chapel 3 towns over, where Victor had paid well for discretion. The witnesses were strangers, paid to pretend they knew the couple. Grace wore a simple white sundress, bought secretly and hidden at Katie's house. Her something borrowed was Katie's bracelet. Her something blue was a bruise on her hip from Victor's latest passionate night. She thought she looked like a bride. The security camera footage later showed she looked like what she was, a terrified child playing dress-up. The ceremony lasted 10 minutes. Grace's hands shook so badly she could barely sign the marriage license. Victor's grip on her arm, hidden by his suit jacket, left finger-shaped bruises that her cheerleading uniform would cover the next day. Their wedding night revealed the full extent of Victor's true nature. In the luxury hotel suite he'd booked, the gentle lover disappeared entirely. "You're my wife now," he said, his accent thickening with anger when Grace cried out in pain. "You'll do as I say." Grace called Katie at 3 a.m., crying in the hotel bathroom. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "This isn't like before. He's different. He's scary." But when Katie begged her to leave, Grace couldn't imagine how. She was trapped, legally bound to a man who now showed no need to maintain his charming facade. The next morning, Victor laid out his new rules. Grace would quit school. She would move into his apartment. She would cut contact with everyone except Katie, whom he still saw as useful for maintaining their cover. When Grace protested, his reaction taught her never to argue again. "I have everything," he told her, scrolling through his phone to show her the photos, videos, and messages he'd collected. One word from me, and everyone sees what a slut you really are. Your father, your church, everyone. Is that what you want? Grace's last diary entry before everything fell apart reads, "This isn't the fairy tale I thought it would be. But it's too late now. I made my choice. I'm Mrs. Victor Cole, for better or worse. Today, it feels like worse." She didn't know then that worse was still to come. The marriage certificate she'd signed with trembling hands would lead her father to the truth. And Victor's careful plans, his years of experience exploiting young girls' romantic dreams, were about to unravel in ways even he couldn't predict. Katie later found Grace's wedding dress stuffed in a garbage bag in her closet. The white fabric was stained with blood and tears, a tragic metaphor for innocence destroyed by obsession. Like Grace herself, it had been discarded once it served its purpose in Victor's dark romance. The next few days would change everything. But in that moment, Grace Anderson, now Grace Cole on forged documents, lay in a luxury hotel bed beside her sleeping husband, watching dawn break over Texas, and wondered how her perfect romance had become a perfect nightmare. It began with a crumpled hotel receipt. David Anderson found it while doing his weekly laundry check, a habit he developed years ago when Grace's mother died, one of the many small ways he tried to stay connected to his teenage daughter. The Crowne Plaza logo caught his eye first, then the date from 3 days ago, and finally the names that made his world stop spinning, Mr. and Mrs. Victor Cole. The discovery ignited something primal in David's heart. His hands trembled as he moved through Grace's room, no longer a father respecting his daughter's privacy but a man desperately searching for answers. Behind the carefully maintained facade of stuffed animals and honor roll certificates, the truth waited. First came the showbox, pushed far under her bed. Inside, hundreds of love letters written in unfamiliar masculine handwriting. "My dearest Grace," they began, each one more intimate than the last. Hotel key cards served as bookmarks. Dried flowers pressed between pages. A collection of memories that no 16-year-old should possess. The burner phone was next, taped beneath her dresser drawer. Thousands of messages documented a relationship that had flourished in darkness. "I need you," Victor had written. "You're the only one who understands me." Each message was time-stamped, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., times when David thought his daughter was safely sleeping. "I kept staring at the phone," David later told investigators, "trying to understand how I'd missed this. How many nights had I checked on her, seen her sleeping form under the blankets, not knowing she was texting this predator." But it was Grace's diary that destroyed him completely. The pink notebook, hidden in her cheerleading bag, chronicled her descent into Victor's web. The early entries showed classic teenage infatuation. His so sophisticated, so different from boys at school. Then came the manipulation. "Victor says Daddy could never understand our love." Finally, the control. "I have to send him photos to prove where I am. He gets so angry when I'm late." The photos hit David like physical blows. His daughter in lingerie. His daughter in hotel rooms. His daughter looking progressively less like the child he knew and more like a woman being forced to grow up too fast. With each image, his fury grew alongside his guilt. Then came the marriage certificate. Professional forgery, but David knew his own signature. Someone had copied it perfectly, used it to steal his daughter's childhood. The date was just days old. While he thought Grace was at a cheerleading competition, she had been becoming Mrs. Victor Cole. When Grace came home that evening, David was waiting in her room. The confrontation exploded like a storm that had been building for months. "How long?" His voice was eerily calm. Grace froze in the doorway, taking in the evidence spread across her bed, her secret life laid bare. "Daddy, I can explain, Da." "How long?" The rage finally broke through. "Since January," she whispered. "At the mall. He was different. Special. Special." David held up the photos. "Is this what you call special? A man 3 times your age grooming my 16-year-old daughter. You don't understand." Grace's voice rose hysterically. "We love each other. He's my husband now." The word husband hit David like a punch. In his mind, Grace was still the little girl who needed help braiding her hair. The reality before him, A teenager with secrets in her eyes and a stranger's ring on a chain around her neck was unbearable. That's when Grace's phone began to explode with messages. Victor, somehow aware that their secret was exposed. The threats were immediate and vicious. Tell him nothing. Remember what I have. One word and everyone sees everything. Grace crumpled to the floor, caught between her father's fury and her abuser's threats. The fantasy world she'd built around Victor's lies was shattering, leaving only fear behind. She tried to run at midnight. David heard her footsteps. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. When her window slid open, he was already moving. He followed her Toyota through dark Texas streets to the Crown Plaza, their usual meeting spot, according to the receipts. Victor was waiting in the parking lot, his Mercedes idling. The security cameras caught everything that followed in harsh fluorescent detail. Grace running to him. David's voice cutting through the night. Victor's mask of sophistication dropping away to reveal something feral underneath. She's mine now, Victor snarled, pushing Grace behind him. The gun appeared in his hand. He'd been prepared for this moment. My wife. My property. The last word triggered something in David. 20 years of Marine Corps training kicked in. When Victor raised the gun, David was already moving. The struggle was brief but violent. 2 shots rang out. When silence fell again, Victor lay still on the asphalt, his own weapon having done the job. Grace's scream brought security running. Then police. Then, finally, the investigators who would uncover the full horror of Victor Cole's operation. His apartment revealed a criminal enterprise spanning years. Multiple passports under different names. Forged documents. Bank accounts containing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And most disturbingly, detailed files on other young girls, future victims he'd been planning to target. It was all a business to him, Detective Martinez explained. Each girl was a potential visa, a path to citizenship. He kept meticulous records, photos, videos, documents. Everything he needed to control them. Grace wasn't even close to being his first victim. Rebecca in Florida. Michelle in California. Sarah in Oregon. Each story followed the same pattern. Young girls with protective fathers, secret romances, fraudulent marriages, eventual abuse. Grace's story had finally broken the cycle. Victor's laptop contained encrypted files detailing his methodology. He called it The Perfect Con, a step-by-step guide to exploiting teenage girls' romantic fantasies. Every gesture, every gift, every declaration of love had been calculated to create maximum dependency. Grace's testimony, when it finally came, was devastating. She spoke for hours, detailing how Victor had systematically isolated her, manipulated her, turned her own teenage desires for independence against her. Her words would help convict him on multiple federal charges, but the damage to her young life was already done. I thought I was special, she told the court, her voice small but steady. He made me believe in a fairy tale. But I was just another target. Just another stupid girl who fell for his lies. The investigation revealed Victor's true identity. James Victor Okonjo, wanted in 3 states under different names. His pattern of predation stretched back decades, across multiple countries. Each time authorities got close, he would shift identities and begin again. David's actions were ruled justified. Security footage clearly showed Victor drawing his weapon first. But legal vindication did little to heal the psychological wounds his family had suffered. The evidence from Victor's apartment painted a picture of calculated evil. His criminal enterprise had been meticulous, patient, and utterly without conscience. In his files, young girls were reduced to opportunities, their dreams, their romantic fantasies, their trust all carefully catalogued and exploited. Grace's healing process began with fire. In their backyard, with Katie holding her hand, she burned her wedding dress, her love letters, every physical reminder of Victor's deception. The flames consumed the evidence of her ordeal, but the emotional scars would take longer to fade. The final piece of evidence was found in Victor's bedside table, a list of names. Future targets. Other young girls he'd been watching, waiting to ensnare. Grace's story had saved them without them ever knowing they'd been in danger. In the end, Security cameras captured their final moment together. Victor, his sophisticated facade gone, being led away in handcuffs. Grace, watching from her father's protective embrace, finally free from the prison of a predator's love. Behind them, the Texas dawn painted the sky in shades of hope, the first light of Grace's new beginning. The investigation would continue for months, uncovering more victims, more crimes, more lives destroyed by Victor's predatory pattern. But for Grace Anderson, survivor and fighter, the journey back to herself had already begun. The aftermath of Grace Anderson's tragedy unfolded like ripples in still water, touching every corner of Cedar Grove. 2 weeks after Victor's arrest, Grace sat in her first therapy session, hands twisted in her lap, unable to meet her counselor's eyes. The girl who once commanded attention as head cheerleader now flinched at sudden movements. "I don't recognize myself anymore," her therapy journals revealed. "Every time I look in the mirror, I see the girl he fooled. The stupid child who thought she was living a romance novel." Night terrors plagued her sleep, Victor's hands, Victor's voice, the sound of gunshots in a hotel parking lot. David Anderson battled his own demons. Each night, he patrolled their house, checking locks he'd already checked, haunted by what he'd missed. "I was so focused on being the perfect father," he confessed during family therapy, "that I didn't see my daughter disappearing right in front of me." The evidence of their ordeal remained scattered like shrapnel. Grace's phone, now in police custody, held thousands of text messages documenting Victor's manipulation. "No one will ever love you like I do. You're so mature for your age. This is our secret paradise." Each message now read like a warning sign they'd all missed. Hotel surveillance footage, played during Victor's trial, showed the evolution of his control. January, Grace bouncing excitedly into his arms. March, Grace following 2 steps behind him, head down. May, Grace flinching when he grabbed her arm in the elevator. A digital timeline of stolen innocence. Katie's testimony proved crucial. "She changed so gradually," she told the court. "First it was just the secret phone calls, the hidden photos. Then she started canceling plans, making excuses. By the end, even when we were together, the real Grace wasn't there anymore. Just this hollow version who lived for his approval." The community rallied, though not always helpfully. Church ladies brought casseroles and whispered prayers. School officials implemented new security measures. Local news painted Grace alternately as victim and cautionary tale. Through it all, she struggled to reclaim her identity. Grace's diary entries tracked her slow healing. Month 1, "I still miss him sometimes. I hate that I miss him." Month 3, "Dad found me crying over our old photos. He held me while I burned them." Month 6, "Went back to cheerleading today. My body feels like my own again." David channeled his guilt into action. He worked with lawmakers to strengthen teen protection laws, turning his daughter's pain into purpose. The Grace Anderson Act closed loopholes in marriage age requirements and enhanced penalties for adult predators. Victor's love tokens, collected as evidence, filled 3 police storage boxes. Designer clothes with tags still attached. Jewelry chosen to make a teenager feel sophisticated. Hotel receipts documenting their romantic meetings. Each item now seemed sinister, pieces of a predator's toolkit. The psychological impact rippled outward. Other teenage girls came forward, sharing stories of older men's attention that had once seemed flattering but now felt dangerous. Parents examined their children's social media more closely. Schools enhanced their counseling programs. Grace's healing wasn't linear. Some days she was the confident teenager she'd been before, laughing with Katie at cheerleading practice. Other days, a car that looked like Victor's Mercedes would send her into panic attacks. But slowly, session by session, she began to understand the difference between love and manipulation. David's redemption came through protection, not just of Grace, but of other potential victims. His testimony helped pass laws in 3 states. The father who couldn't save his daughter from Victor Cole dedicated himself to saving others. Katie remained Grace's anchor, the one person who had witnessed everything but never judged. Their friendship, tested by secrets and lies, emerged stronger. "She's not just my best friend anymore," Katie said. She's my sister in survival. The long-term impacts manifested in unexpected ways. Grace became an advocate, speaking at schools about predatory grooming. David trained police departments on recognizing signs of teen exploitation. Even Katie chose to study psychology, inspired by watching her friend's recovery. But perhaps the most profound change was invisible, the quiet rebuilding of trust between father and daughter. It happened in small moments. David learning to let Grace make her own choices while remaining vigilant. Grace learning to value her father's protection without resenting it. A year after Victor's arrest, Grace stood before a room of parents and teenagers, her voice steady. I thought I was living a great romance. Instead, I was being groomed by a predator. But this isn't just my story. It's a warning, a lesson, and hopefully, a prevention. The final pieces of evidence, Grace's diary, the text messages, the photos, were sealed in court records, a testament to how easily love can become a weapon. But Grace Anderson's true legacy was the lives saved by her story, the teenagers who recognized manipulation before it became tragedy. Cedar Grove changed too. The community learned that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like successful businessmen with charming accents and expensive cars. Sometimes the greatest danger lies in believing that love conquers all. In the end, Grace graduated high school with honors, her father beaming in the audience. She aged out of being Victor's type, no longer the naive teenager vulnerable to manipulation. But her story continued to protect others, a beacon warning young girls about the difference between romance and predation. The old Grace Anderson died in that hotel parking lot alongside Victor's lies. The new Grace emerged stronger, wiser, but also gentler with herself. She learned that survival isn't just about healing from trauma, it's about reclaiming the right to trust, to love, and to believe in genuine connection again. Her final therapy journal entry read, "I'm not a victim anymore. I'm not a cautionary tale. I'm just Grace, learning to live and love authentically in a world that's both beautiful and dangerous. And that's enough."